Integrated Pest Management has been around for 40 years, I would say, as an idea, and it's been growing steadily, but that Integrated Pest Management is the basis of what Live adopts as it directs itself in a technical, from a technical background, and implements that into our agricultural systems. So Paula's going to talk to you today about global perspectives and things we are doing, advancing the cause of IPM to show us, hopefully, that we are on the right track. Okay.
Thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. And I'll hopefully warm you up. Well, I was guest speaker at the National Hop Convention a couple of years ago, and I nearly became overcome with emotion at that, because that relates to my lifelong beverage. And but I noticed halfway through the talk, everyone was very distracted by the plates that were passing around, and they were rubbing hops between their hands and opening them up, so that by the end of the presentation, the whole room had this wonderful aroma of hops. So I'm not quite sure how tempted you'll get by the bottles by the time I've been talking, but feel free, of course. I'm going to say IPM makes sense because I'm going to be talking about remote sensing and some modern factors. We're also going to go on a global tour. I'm going to take you to West Africa, actually, where we're doing some work at the moment, just for your interest. And I'm going to end up with a bit of a quiz, a question to ask you about where it is in the United States. Which state do you think IPM, the farming industry, and the politicians are most keyed into sustainability and reducing pesticide risk? Which state is that? I'd love to hear a few guesses later, and then I'm going to surprise you with the answer. Don't say Oregon, because sadly we're not in the lead there. Although we'd love to be, and that's part of my mission, really. The last few years I've got in my career, I'm hoping we make a lot better progress in the next few years than we've done heretofore. I'm going to start out with a little bit about our climate, and here's 3 images, if you can just about see this. It's of a country we know and love. I'm a newly minted citizen, so I'm particularly attracted to this map at the moment. And through 2009, 2011, 2012, this increased expansion in latitudinal range of this red zone, that shows the places of the states that in the winter that are just warmer than we've really experienced in our recent history. So we've got a very unpredictable climate at the moment, and we also know that it's changing. I don't know whether you can see any little pock marks on that, any little red blotches just above the main red zone there. Do you know what that might be? Cities, correct. So what that tells you is that cities and urban areas are rather warmer on balance than areas that aren't urbanized. What does that mean for pest diseases and weeds? Is that good news for pest disease and weed survival? Yes. Is that bad news for farmers and viticulturists such as yourself? Also yes. And so I was giving testimony and this is a map actually of the overwintering survival probability of a really nasty little pest called spotted wing Drosophila that's been an absolute nuisance in Oregon recently, and we're just building an IPM program at the moment. So one thing I wanted to mention to you was that our IPM centre here actually provides the modelling and climate and weather infrastructure of the National Biosecurity Framework. So we may be a relatively small state, a long way from Washington DC, but we pack a very big punch in our programme, and we love it when people take up and use the tools that we develop. Here's a map of Oregon, that's the same area, and I was actually giving testimony in the legislature in Salem the other day, and I noted a patch of hot air that was somewhere around Salem, and that comment didn't go down terribly well, actually. But if you take out this urban influence, that red zone you see in the middle of the valley there, if you ignore the urban influence, it looks like we've got a fairly benign, cool winter temperature environment, but actually the level of urbanization we've got means that we've got more survival and capability for pests to kind of start off early in the spring than we ever really thought we had. So it's just kind of beware as urban encroachment occurs, and as you get closer to patches of glass houses and urban development and schools and supermarkets and blacktop, that does have some kind of impact. And the tools we develop to help farmers make decisions based on climate and weather take this into account. And I mentioned in that first map to start with, I don't know whether we can get the lights down a tiny little bit more. If it's not possible, then never mind. Can you see at the back? Yeah. Just okay. What's the evidence that, one way we could look for evidence that our climate is a bit more uncertain is all these tools we developed help farmers make decisions. Surely people are going to be using them a lot more than they used to because they just don't know what the weather's going to be like in the next week. So we've started tracking that data over the last few years. And just for Oregon alone, the blue line here is the number of people that go to our website and actually stay long enough to identify their location, pick a farm, and stay on our website for more than 3 minutes and use one of our models that we provide. And what we've found nationwide, because we do this in all 48 contiguous states, is we've got this exponential increase in the use of the models. It's not because I'm just going out telling people about it all the time. It's because our climate's genuinely getting very, very uncertain. The warming trend we're seeing is making farmers nationwide twitchy about whether or not some horrible pest disease and weed is going to be affecting them in the week ahead. And so our ability now to deliver 5-day ahead forecasts, I believe, is the best in the country. And if you go to our website, you'll get the best. If you're wondering when to take the old car out for a drive on the country lanes and you don't get spots of rain on it, you can use the website for that. But it's also useful for things like botrytis and powdery mildew. And actually these 3 blobs that you can see on the screen here from the black, this is a new thing. If you go to our website and you find Newburgh and you click on your area, you will be able to see this. It's at Beaverton at the top going down to Eugene in the south. There's a 5-day map broken down into 800-meter squares that tells you what the botrytis and powdery mildew risk is going to be in the 5 days ahead. So this is really state-of-the-art information flow, and it's the type of thing we hope will be useful to you. You probably won't be able to see this from the back, and I know that because I can hardly see it from the front. But this is the kind of website you see where you can identify the weather stations that are providing data for you, and you can see the 10 days weather that have passed and the 5 days of weather that are to come, and then the risk of some of these diseases actually flaring up in the commodity that you grow. I mention this because I don't know whether you can see that Newburgh is in the middle left here. We've actually got rather few weather stations sending us data, and there is an opportunity here for some of you to start getting weather stations, getting them on the internet, and we get access to that data. We improve the quality of the local information that you have. So if some of you want to consider that, or work with OVS or some of these excellent agronomists around here on how one might do this, we'd be very grateful. Our website at the moment, it accesses 26,000 weather stations nationwide every 15 minutes, and we store that data. So, this is an incredible enterprise we've got, but we do rely on having some density of local weather stations to help support the industries we have in Oregon. So anyway, enough about the weather, it's fascinating, but I'm sorry, I'm going to go back once more. On this regular page you come up, all you do is you put in your zip code, you tick grapes, and up comes a graph that shows you all the weather stations that are nearest to your farm. So that this is just 2 clicks away. And down here, if you can hear me, this is where you can click on the disease grid map to get this new utility we've developed. You just click on that link and you can see this map come up, and during the season you can see how risky the conditions are and whether or not a fungicide might need to be applied. Another thing you can do now is you can click on the map of your farm, and this is Persephone Farm near Lebanon, Oregon. I'm going to mention again in a few minutes. And it'll tell you how many days behind 200 or ahead of 2012, 2011 and the 30-year normals you are. And it's often helpful to know how far advanced or pushed back we are in the year in terms of weather. It just helps us in our conversations. And people say, oh, it's a bit warmer than it was last year, but I don't know how much. This is a way that can tell you at a resolution where the separate fields on your farm can give you different numbers. So that's something you might find useful. So I'm now going to switch. So that was a bit of remote sensing about climate and weather, and I just want to interest you in that. We give lots of seminars and events around Oregon, and we respond to invitations to do workshops and work with your managers the whole time. So we hope to see some of you and the people that work with you, of course. We're passionate about parasitic wasps. Why? Because they inject their eggs into the pests that live in your vines and other commodities, and they stop them being pests. And they're a heck of a lot nicer to have around than pesticides, and they're incredibly important. But one of the issues we've got in the state is that gradually, as our agriculture has flourished, and herbicides have become super special and super effective, we've lost a lot of our flora. And all of these little insects require a nectar or pollen meal every morning in order to fly into the field and parasitize the pest that you don't want there. So in simplifying our landscape and having it look squeaky clean and green and perfect as you consider it to be, historically what we've done is we've got rid of some of the biodiversity that's actually supporting the agriculture that we love. So having plants around is a good thing, but which plants, how many of them, what you do, it's all really complicated. I don't know whether you can see this nice figure here. I should expand a little bit. Here are some aphids at the bottom here that have, all that's left is the aphid skin, because the parasitic wasp here that you can see in this picture has just emerged from that aphid. And when a little papery remains of an aphid like, they're called mummies, like Egyptian mummies. That's rather good. Some of the wasps, unfortunately, are messy eaters, and this is a cabbage butterfly that's got the pupae of about 50 parasites that have consumed it from the inside outwards. So you could say pesticides are more humane, but hopefully you're not going to say that. You know, we want these insects around. But the question comes up, how do we advise you on the hard science behind where you put these insectary plants to support the parasitic wasps and how much of it you need? Because although, yes, it might be rather beautiful to have some lovely flowers on the edges of your vineyards, it costs money, it needs attention, and you need to do it the right way. So I've just started working with an incredible postdoc from Cameroon in West Africa, Stephen Nzietzi, and he's developed a system that links GPS units to cameras to the internet, and we can send you a map with amazing quantification of the distribution of useful plants around your farm. And so this farm I mentioned to you a while ago, Persephone Farm, I don't know whether you can see this, but interspersed between all of their plants, they have little patches of insectary plants. So when you stand next to the crop, you look like, to the table at the back there, you'll see 10 dwarf sunflowers and 3 orish plants. And you look to the other far corner, you'll see 10 alyssum plants and something else. And they said, well, we've worked over time, but that's just the right amount we need to support beneficial insects in our crop. And we say to them, well, that doesn't look very much to us, you know, is that really the most efficient approach you can take? Shouldn't you do something perfect and linear and scientific and rather Teutonic, really, and put a nice stripe of plants in the field, because we think that's really a good thing to do? Well, no, we think we've worked it out the best way. So this is Stephen. We got him to walk around the farm, taking photographs, coming up with this lovely imagery. And what we discovered was, for one field, I've expanded here, they just had a few patches of marigold, sunflower, sage, cilantro, and calendula, and it actually constituted 0.62%, less than 1% of the area they farm. Yet when you stand in the field and look, and you ask someone to guess how much of this vegetable field do you think someone's devoted to these insectary plants, people scratch their heads and say, well, 5%, you know, and that sounds like quite a lot, 1/20th. It's actually not, it's 1/200th of the field, which, you know, to spare for such a valuable ecological service sounds great to me. Now, I don't, if you can see this is Persephone Farm with all their insectary patches, with various zones drawn around it, with the new decision support tools we've got that tell you what the zone of influence is of all of their insectary plants. And annoyingly to us, but gratifyingly to Jeff and Eleanor who run the farm, we've shown that this is by far the most efficient method they've come up with, just by simply looking at the farm, finding out what's going on, seeing what works and optimizing it. They've come up with the strategy for deploying insectary plants that actually gets the parasites earliest and in most numbers to the places on the farm where they're needed. And we worked out it was 1/4 as efficient to have one big long strip of insectary plants right next to the field. So that's pretty cool, really. Shows how incredible innovators farmers are, and it reminds you how important it is to walk out into the grapes and actually look at what's going on. I'm sure you all do that every day, but that's the thing that drives successful agriculture, really, monitoring and understanding what's going on. So now I'm just going to go to the kind of distaff side of the equation, really, the chemical use, which of course chemicals are incredibly important in modern agriculture in terms of saving money, protecting crops, delivering the food supply we need. And they're certainly part of your agriculture in Oregon wine. but we've wanted for a very long time in IPM to have a tool that can tell us what the relative impacts of pesticides are, so all other things being equal, you can make wise choices about which chemicals to use. And with a group of cooperators, we've developed this tool called PRIME, the Pesticide Risk Mitigation Engine, and some certification organisations like Salmon Safe are now working with us in the West on this, and it's also a tool we're using globally, and I was going to tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes without outstaying my welcome. I've been asked to talk for about half an hour, by the way, and I've been told what brilliant questions you're going to have to ask in a few minutes' time, so this is going to be fun, but excuse me. I should mention that's coffee. So I went to Napa a few weeks ago, and I was talking to the wine grape growers there, and apparently some of them were very important, distinguished kind of quasi-royalty in the winemaking world, all very, very nice people, terribly posh. And I don't have many wine anecdotes, unfortunately, but I went to a college in Cambridge in England that's really a very distinguished place to have the privilege of going to school. And I realised there, I was told over the 6 years I was there that I was drinking unique wines at kind of the last 5 bottles in the world, and was still drinking it for the price when it was bought in the 19th century. And I realised I should have kept a record of what I'd been sipping to tell you about it, but I never did that, I'm afraid. But it was tasty stuff. But this, in Napa, of course, they have similar, great claims about the wine. I'm sure it's lovely. But one thing we did was to analyse the risks associated with the chemical use programs they have. And all you need to know on these graphs is that as far across to the left you are, the better. And when you move across to the right, the toxicity of a particular chemical gets rather high. And then we're looking at the risk to aquatic invertebrates, aquatic algae, fish reproduction, earthworms, small mammals, birds, and acute risk and bird reproductive risk. And what you'll see there for this winery is that for the combinations of chemicals they're using, about 10 or 15 chemicals, they've got high levels of toxicity in their winery to aquatic invertebrates, small mammals, and birds. And the drivers of that risk, interestingly, are organic oils, because this is an organic winery. It's badge, copper product that's used as a fungicide, and another type of oil. It's 2 types of oil and copper as a fungicide. And so it just goes to show that you need to take care with your choices and also learn about the approaches to mitigate and minimize these risks over time. So we had a really fascinating morning, first getting over the fact that risks exist, because that was an issue. But then once we'd done that, we were able to talk through a series of strategies with the farmers about how to minimize risk. And this is one of the things that, of course, Live exemplifies. It's the philosophy of what you're doing, and the science that supports this is advancing all the time. This doesn't mean to say this vineyard is kind of a catastrophic hotspot of ecological harm. What it means is there are things that this particular winery is going to pay attention to do with nozzle choice, targeting their sprays, treating parts of the winery, not treating the whole thing, modifying the sprayer, putting in buffer zones that are simply going to enable them to do what they do without some of the harm they hadn't anticipated. Now we go to a conventional winery, you'll see that the spectrum of risks is rather higher, and again I'm not going to go into great detail here. All of these are manageable through either some different choices, some alternative pest management practices, or some best management practices for chemical use, but it really helps never to take anything for granted, or to always think through, acquire, get access to the most up-to-date tools, learn from them, and adapt your sustainability programs as you go. And so I didn't want that to be a depressing message. They have very high pest pressures in Napa. They don't have pesticide residues in their wines, and they produce fantastic wines. But by learning through, using new tools, finding out about what's going on, we're just developing an adjustment to their approach that will allow them to sustain that message and sustain their wineries. And there's some growers in Oregon, actually, this is for several hundred corn growers here, that are able to see their relative risks to their neighbours. Now, they don't know who their neighbours are, you just get a random number assigned to you, but you can go to this tool and find out, as grower number here, 1950, where you lie on the spectrum of risks for all these different indexes relative to your neighbours. And again, that's something we'd love to work with you on as an industry, because if you can see what the spread of risk is and you know where you lie, you can make your own individual choices in a kind of non-confrontational way. And it's called self-assessment, this, and it kind of works rather well. So if you like, another way to look at this is keeping up with some of those other commodities in Oregon for their sustainability practices. Some people are making some pretty big strides at the moment, and this is a particularly interesting example. Another way in which some growers in Oregon are making big strides, this is in the Walla Walla Basin where Kevin Masterson comes from, he was talking earlier. And all the, you can probably see the blue rectangle here, it's a computer screen. And then there's a map here of several hundred fields that have apples in them in the Walla Walla Basin. And then you'll see west of Milton's Free Water, there's a lot of green blobs, yellow blobs and red blobs. The coloured blobs represent data from pheromone traps for codling moth in apples. And you know, when you bite an apple, what you don't want to see is half a worm poking out, because you know what happens to the other half, don't you? You know. So codling moth are, really not cool. And what used to happen was, one farmer would detect codling moth in their pheromone traps. The farmers down the road would see they were spraying, and they'd all get out and spray it. What we've discovered is having the farmers share when and how much codling moth they've got in their orchards, they're just little patches. So even somebody next door to a field that's quite heavily infested may not have an infestation themselves. And this, amongst some other measures, has resulted in an 80% reduction in use of organophosphates in the Walla Walla area over 10 years. And you might say, well, that's all rather good, it's saved them a bit of money. Well, it's done more than that. This is an equivalent example, but it's an example of what we call the Pesticide Stewardship partnerships in Oregon, where the blue triangles are the frequency of detection of pesticides, and the red histograms are the concentration, and the lines are the water quality standards that would, if you fall below those, you're protecting juvenile salmon in your streams. And the farmers in that basin I just showed you, as well as this particular basin I'm showing you here, Neal Creek in the Dalles, they've managed to reduce their organophosphate levels in streams to almost undetectable levels over the past 5 or 6 years by combining some of the tools I've been telling you about today. This is a globally significant story, as I was actually asked to go and testify to the US Congress in DC about this next week. I can't make it as it happens, but this is a big deal nationwide, because we've got farmers here engaging in voluntary practices, sharing information amongst themselves, whereas they used to be very, very concerned about sharing this information. Oh God, no, how can we have someone know I've got codling moth? Well, duh. Everyone is susceptible to this organism. If you share information about the occurrence of the pest, then you have a chance of managing it in an area-wide way. That means you have to spray a lot less. So that's a nice example of your wonderful state, our wonderful state. A set of other wonderful states here, one of them subject to war at the moment, the Republic of Mali, this green blob in the graph you can see. And we're working with farmers not just on the Walla Walla River and the Willamette River, but on the Senegal and Niger rivers as well. And ourselves and many colleagues are working with 750,000 farmers distributed between these 30 sites. You could actually fit the whole of the United States into that area. It's an incredibly vast zone. 70% of people have never been to grade school, 60% of people are illiterate. You go into a village, you're surrounded by many, many little 5-year-old kids, a few teenagers and 10 adults. So the demography basically is driven towards many farmers being less than 20. So the idea that there's cultural exchange and this amazing knowledge that's passed on over the generations, and agriculture is this incredibly evolved thing in many parts of the world, either has never been the case, it certainly isn't the case now. Let's not, you can't be sentimental about agriculture anywhere, certainly not here. However, there's certainly farmers upon whom the survival of their family depends on the produce they deliver, and so they are part of the modern pesticide revolution, just as you, ladies and gentlemen, are. We work in drainage canals and irrigated areas like this. I don't know whether you can see that. It's about 3 miles long, 1 mile wide. There's 300 fields. There's about 1,000 villages, and they manage this irrigation system and produce rice as a staple crop and a load of vegetables. Women grow the vegetables, the men grow the rice. And for Senegal, one of the countries we're working in, this is prime data again from that tool I told you about. There's a list of crops down the left, a list of our aquatic, terrestrial and human health indexes in prime along the right. And if there's a red blob there, it means the risks are unacceptably high. And what you see is a lot of red blobs. There's a huge amount of chemical use that's being supported by some of the industries that actually sell chemicals to you guys in Oregon. It's just an unregulated marketplace, and what they feel they're empowered to sell in Senegal, I can tell you, is rather more toxic than what they feel empowered to sell in Oregon. One of those contrasts in the world that, again, reminds us never to take anything for granted. So what does one do about that? And with a group of people who are incredibly committed to good agriculture, but they need that food, my goodness, they need to earn the money from it, they also need to feed their families. And so we work with a very large network. We're just part of this, 750,000 farmers who participate in what are called farmer field schools. They have a set of fields that they manage themselves with the help of a facilitator. They walk into field plots and they say, well, normally you use a pesticide, why would you use it? You know, let's have a look, is there any pest here? Let's see what a pest is, let's see what it does. Let's make a little tent. And let's throw some natural enemies into the tent and some pests and see if we get more pests or fewer pests when we have the natural enemies. So it's basically experimentation and observation and learning. And basically conventional practices are compared with new practices, and it's the field is the laboratory and it's also the source of learning. There's no instructor here. I don't turn up and give lectures. That's not the way this works. It's called participatory education. Practical solutions through discovery learning. This young lady is 18, her brother is 17, they both run farms and feed their families. But they've learned basically about farming through sharing their experiences and observations with their fellow farmers in a farmer field school, in this case in Western Mali. I hope they're still alive, I think they probably are, and I'll be going back there later this year. Mali's at war at the moment, but this program is still continuing. Let's have a look at some of the results, and I'll just show you this data here. Well, first of all, in 62 IPM initiatives in 26 countries, there's been a 72% decrease in pesticide use and a 35% increase in yield. Pretty amazing, eh? And with this group of farmers we're talking to in West Africa here, 25,000 families that were part of the pilot scheme, yield has increased by about 25%, pesticide use has gone down about 75%, and their margins have gone up 40%. So, you know, never take anything for granted, learn how to measure and observe, trust your observations, make good decisions, and get the feeling for what's going on the farm. It should be a feeling, not just a number on a page. Whoops, I shouldn't have showed you that. I was going to ask you, where are things going really well in the States? Because the answer's a surprise. Where is the greatest commitment to IPM and sustainability? Really, not just saying it, but actually doing it, actually delivering the results. And I was asking at breakfast today, and I heard Iowa and New York State, I think. Hawaii? Hawaii's really good, actually. That's well done, yes. So Hawaiian farmers have demonstrated with Mediterranean fruit fly control that if they combine a set of preventative practices, they can minimize the risk of fruit fly attack. Some of the growing, again, high value horticultural production there is less beneficial in terms of IPM, but it's not necessarily the best, but that's a really good one. Any other suggestions? Maryland? Could be. Wisconsin. And I don't know the political map of the US very much, the red state, blue state thing, but you know, we think of IPM sustainability as being associated with this kind of view of the world that may be more a little bit associated with the kind of more bluish hue of the states, do you think? Yeah, you couldn't be more wrong. You couldn't, no. It's Arizona. So I find this really fascinating, but it's something I've observed. I've only been here 17 years, but the places that really do it, you can't prejudge who they're going to be on our view of the world. Imposing our view of the way the world polarizes itself in this country is a terrible guide to sustainable agriculture. It's really terrible. So, and this is, I'm going to tell you a little story about lettuce production because I find it incredibly inspiring. So the Arizona lettuce industry grows $1 billion worth of lettuces a year, and they feed, basically it's America's lettuce supply for 3 months of the year in the winter. So in food security terms, in terms of essential nutrients, I think that's pretty amazing. They actually, rather quietly, in 1991 said, we're going to do this sustainability thing, and we're going to work on IPM, reducing pesticide use and reducing pesticide risk. But we're not going to shout to the world about it, we just want to do it and see how far we get. It didn't mean in their case actually reducing the number of sprays. And this is data we've analysed in the last 2 months for 1.5 million sprays between 1991 and 2012. And we gave this at a public meeting in Arizona 2 weeks ago to cheers from the audience. Absolutely amazing, the commitment to sustainability that I saw there. From people who it's a conservative group. Very, very conservative. Some of the other things I hear from this group are things that I find very difficult to process myself. However, their commitment to sustainability, I can process that. I hope you all can. And that is really remarkable. So the number of sprays on average has gone down from 9 to around 5 or 6. And I guess that's not so unusual and no big deal. What they've really done though, which we haven't even really started to do in Oregon yet, the red line is the number of sprays per lettuce field that are broad-spectrum pesticides, organophosphates, pyrethroids, some of the neonicotinoids, and carbamate insecticides. They've reduced their use through commitment to IPM by 95% since 1991, and they've committed to the adoption of new lower-risk chemistries to a degree that's quite remarkable, more than anywhere else in the country, really. Now, LIVE is a program that helps you move along this pathway, so that's why I'm a big supporter of it and why I'm so honoured to be here today. But it takes this long-term commitment, really. So here are their prime indexes going from that tool I've got. And all I want you to notice is we go from a zone of around 0.5, which is intermediate risk in all of those indexes I was telling you about earlier with not much detail. And over 20 years or so, the risk in all of these indexes has come down, such that now there may still be some residual areas they want to work on, and we've been invited back by the IPM program there to work cooperatively over the next 3 years on eliminating these further risks. But they've made an incredible amount of progress by being cooperative, committed to IPM, reducing pesticide risk by measuring it, knowing what it is, taking it seriously, and trying to eliminate it from their marketplace. And they can now make the biggest claims, really, of anyone in the country for their progress in sustainability. So good for them, but just shows you shouldn't make assumptions, doesn't it? Because they don't shout about this. They just quietly tell the market chain, you can rely on what the lettuce we're growing. We don't need somebody putting their stamp on it, actually, in this case. They're saying, trust us, here are the data. So for this state, actually, it was no controversy whatsoever to have a pesticide use reporting scheme to go to the State Department of Agriculture. No controversy at all. It passed the year it was suggested. It was supported by the ag industry. And I've got all sorts of theories for why things are so successful there. One is that it's farmers themselves in the agricultural industry that speaks up for agriculture in their legislature. It's not representatives and lobby groups for the industries that support agriculture, which is what we have here. So if you want my kind of thumbnail example of why things are less advanced in Oregon, I think that's one of the reasons, that our farming groups don't necessarily speak for themselves. Food for thought. So this is the plan of lettuce fields in Arizona, showing all these red blobs of toxicity to songbirds back in 1991. And the colour now has changed to a pale yellow, which indicates pretty universal low risk to songbirds nowadays. And they're going to be, this is pretty amazing stuff. So a few weeks ago, OSU, for the third time since I've been in Oregon, came up with a new version of what it thinks a beaver looks like. In this case, I think it looks like a sea lion that's been hit with a can of spray paint, but it's... I'm not sure rebranding is always necessary. Perhaps it is. But we're not talking about rebranding Oregon wine, are we? You've made incredible progress. You should be really proud of it. The fact we've heard these votes of confidence in live today, I think is really remarkable. So you're doing all the right things, honestly, and it's really worth doing. And if anything in my talk has left you feeling slightly uncomfortable or could we be doing more, we're talking about reinforcing your brand with good data and support, not rebranding. Yeah, perhaps you do need a new version of Benny, who knows, the Beaver, but that was my weak message about the fact this is just constant improvement and acknowledging the way the science is advancing without necessarily thinking you have to revolutionise what you're doing or change what you're doing. So, just the very last slide, we're now running a lot of courses, and we're going to have an online course in sustainable pest management starting next year, so there's all sorts of ways of finding out about us. As farmers, you can come to our events, find out about things, we can come to your workshops, visit your wineries. We're proud to serve Oregon, and thank you for what you do.
Hey, thank you, Paul. That's intriguing. We have 10, 15 minutes for lots of questions. We'll just start off. You can take from there however you want.
Paul, how frequently do you update the database for new chemistries?
Good question. How frequently do we update the database for new chemistries? We're constantly doing it in the Prime group. And then the website gets updated probably about every 6 months. So we do find there's a bit of a lag sometimes, and we're sorry about that when it happens. But most of the chemistries that are out there at the moment are on Prime. I would say that you get fantastic advice and support from the agronomists that you work with in Oregon. Prime's new for them just as it is for us. It's knowing about the efficacy, the cost, whether or not you need to use the chemical in the first place, are there alternative practices, what is the marketplace going to accept, are there trade restrictions, there's all sorts of other considerations. It's not just about risk, but this one piece of the equation is what's new. And we love the fact that this data is widely available and publicly available now.
What's the address of your website where I can find my pest problem and my yield risk?
Right. You could, it's uspest.org. uspest.org/WEA. And you'll find a screen there. We don't have the internet today, or else I'd show you. You find a screen where you can, I think it's called Quick Links. You just click on that and you're asked for your zip code to name the crop you grow, and up pops that map.
We do have the internet if you want.
We do have the internet. Always dangerous getting me in charge of the internet, I'm afraid. But
questions?
Any questions?
Paul, on your slide you showed the risks for different categories, avian, earthworm,
Yes.
going down.
Yes.
And I was wondering, is there also impact observations being made in real farmers' conditions to see that these risks are also associated with populations? And
Good question. So this wasn't the long version of the Prime talk, Chad, but the way this tool works is that we take the lab data that companies contribute to EPA and other agencies when they register their chemicals, and then we calibrate that against the measurements of effects that are out there in the real world. So there's a graph I showed to farmers when we're talking to them, which shows that even pesticides with quite high toxicity to birds in the field actually are not toxic because they get redistributed between the soil and the trunks of the leaves, they degrade quickly, and so they're just not available to the bird. So the chemical really has to be at a very high rate or really very toxic before birds start being killed. So we've calibrated all of the indexes against field effects, number one. Secondly, so if you apply on, which you wouldn't do probably, an insecticide on December the 23rd, and there's no birds in the field, you're not going to kill any birds. And so, but over time, although it's very expensive to do, there have been a large number of studies on birds, and they tend to back up what we're showing, that the high risk does equate to a genuine risk to birds. And the man that developed the bird risk tool is Pierre Minot, and he's the world authority on pesticide risk to birds, and he's been through all of these details of how big their feet are, whether or not the feet are covered in feathers, are they seed eaters, do they live in the tree, do they walk on the ground, and there are some differences, but broadly speaking, it's a pretty predictive tool as well as being a good risk indicator. But just because you see high risk there, if you've got no surface water nearby, anywhere near your field, then risk to aquatic invertebrates is kind of irrelevant. So it has to be interpreted by yourself as the end user. However, as a measure of risk, it's considered to be at the moment the kind of best thing that's out there. And we've spoken about this tool to the major world congresses in toxicology. We've subjected ourselves to inquisition by the EPA, and we've had input from the chemical industry, although we've not made changes in response to their input because of the inherent bias that's within that. But we do have colleagues and friends in the chemical industry who, although they wish we weren't doing this, they are support that if anyone's going to do it, they feel that our group and the other group we work with are the kind of candidates that they'd prefer. So we think it gives a realistic worst case scenario, and that's a term that's used in a considered way in the world of environmental toxicology. If you apply things to the label rate, you don't have chemicals spilling outside the field, and there's no runoff, you're not on a high slope, you're not using chemicals from your field or orchard, then you're minimizing risks, you're taking care, and use of some very toxic chemicals should have, even very toxic ones, may have no harm at all. But out there in the broader world, on average, we think this is fairly predictive of the risks that are going to transpire. Yes? Hello?
I want to go back to an earlier part of your talk. You were talking about survival software
Yes.
and weather data and so forth. This is kind of a common question or comment, we get sort of work through this. As I understand, spotting Drosophila, the ovipositor has an ability to penetrate a certain tensile strength skin.
Good,
That's
yes.
largely a problem with people, with growers like caneberries,
Yes.
and blueberries, and so forth. And the problem with spotted Drosophila and grapes is largely an issue, as I understand it, of things like powdery mildew.
Yes.
And because powdery mildew makes holes in the skin.
Right.
And so the point I want to make here is that from your data that you were showing with weather, you showed your weather data were based on large numbers of weather platforms scattered
Yes.
throughout various regions, and not just the local official weather forecast, which might be the McMinnville Airport if you're here in this area. And what we found when I look at weather data from various stations, the data that we get up in the hills,
Yes.
whether on the west side or the east side
Yes.
or whatever, is
Yeah.
very, very different
It is.
from what you get from
Yes.
the McMinnville Airport.
Yes.
You might see on Rufus, for example.
Good.
Very,
Yeah.
very different.
Very good.
So if you're now monitoring and determining what sprays you want to do for
Yes.
powdery mildew, for example,
Yes.
I'm going to tie it all together now.
Yes.
What you're going to do for powdery mildew, you really need to know what your own local
Exactly,
weather
yeah.
data are,
Right.
whether your local
Exactly.
weather
Very good.
conditions are, and not what McMinnville Airport
Yeah.
tells you to do, because
Yes.
you may miss something. Or you
Very
may,
good.
Or you may do too many sprays.
Yes.
On the data are. So, so if you're now downstream dealing with spotted Drosophila,
Yes.
you really have
Good
to have
question.
good data upstream.
Great.
So,
Thank you very much. You're exactly right. So, can someone find where the internet is on this device? Does anyone know which? Is it this one? Right. This? WebEx? So that was a really great question. He's exactly right. The weather changes vertically, and it changes with aspects, and it changes relative to whether or not you can view the coast. Actually, within our system, we take into account all of those factors. So you can select a particular weather station, But for anyone that's, and as I mentioned earlier, I made a slight plea for you as a community to consider putting in 5 or 6 more, probably not more than that, so we can improve the resolution here. But we have built into our system all of the models that you'd need to tell you what the weather is like in a particular place that's in a valley or up on a little slope or looking towards the coast or looking towards Portland. And you can do that by inserting what's called a virtual weather station. And it takes a little bit of technique to do that, and we'd be very glad to, can you hear me? Be very glad to come back and do a workshop there. But what happens is you can designate one of your vineyards as representative of a particular slope, aspect or place, and then plot in that location a virtual weather station, and then over an hour it generates a 30-year weather data set for that location, taking into account your slope, all of the things that I've been talking about. And so when I mentioned the national biosecurity infrastructure that we provide the modelling underpinning for, the concern in 2001, of which we all had many concerns then, was that someone was going to come here from and deposit some terrible disease in Oregon and kill all our wheat. And so we actually developed a biosecurity framework in the US to protect ourselves from bioterrorism. And that part of our work goes down to 800 meters resolution, which is, if you are interested, we could work with yourselves or OVS or somebody to put in, say, a group of virtual stations, and you check that this is working, but then you can see some of that finer detail. Or you as a community put in 5 weather stations that provide weather data to the internet, and then when you put in your zip code, you'll see more weather stations for your area than you did previously. And both are good. We need a few more weather stations, but also you can produce a virtual station here. The one thing we've got on the tool here that allows you to see this level of resolution is if you go, here's the quick start I mentioned, where you put in your zip code. Then we've got a thing called Map Index, where you can go to any state and find out all the weather stations that are available. And in Oregon, there's weather data coming from several hundred stations, and you can use this utility actually to introduce your own station. But if you go all the way out here to degree day maps, this is the only thing I'm going to show you because I promised not to give an educational seminar today. But I hope you're paying attention. You can go to Oregon on this map, and then click what's called the new Google Maps interface. And then let's see quickly if we can find your, so up pops then, oh dear, what's going on? Right, up pops a map that shows Oregon and our weather displayed in a lot of detail. So let's just zoom into Oregon and find this lovely part of the world that you live in here. And let's zoom in a little bit more. And eventually you go past the ability of the map to actually generate colour. But you can zoom in a very, very long way. You can see there's a long way to go here still. So let's just zoom in a bit more. Have we gone estacadas there? Are we getting closer to somewhere you recognise here? Yeah, there we are. There's Newburgh. And you'll see here the colour resolution for the temperature accumulation. It's much finer grains than all those weather stations I showed you. We've actually got the data in here for leaf wetness, for rainfall prediction, for temperature, for relative humidity. All of those data are available. It's just not many people ask. So thanks for asking. But I'll zoom in a little bit more. And I'm not going to go all the way because it's a slightly slow internet connection, but I'm going to click on somewhere now. Tell me when the hand is over a place where there's a vineyard. Which direction do you want it to go in? See the hand there? Just around Newburgh? This area?
Right in here is where Adelsheim is, I think, right?
All right, around there? Okay, so I press the hand down, and it's sending a query. Oh, you see, and here it tells me that the local weather station is short of 21 days data for this year so far. So there's a quality control built in here where we're not going to give you bad data, we're going to tell you if the data are bad, okay? This is an indication you need a few more weather stations. Let's click somewhere else where I know there are more weather stations around. And what you get up then in the top left, I know you can't see this, it says that this is station KUAQ. It's 2 days ahead of 2012 at the moment, 4 days ahead of 2011, but 8 days behind normal for the 30-year averages. So at 800 meters resolution, you can see that data. This is a long answer to a really beautiful question, which was, how can I get the resolution I need? And the answer is either work through one of your colleagues here that has access to us so we can put a virtual station on your vineyard. We can't do that for hundreds of people, we can do that for a few. Or consider putting in a few more weather stations in your area. But I thank you so much for your patience and interest today. Some really good questions, and just wanted to say, you know, never give up on IPM or live. It's a great thing to do. Certifications programs really work in the marketplace, and you've got a lot of colleagues in Oregon and other equally interesting states like Arizona that also take this stuff seriously. So thank you very much indeed.